Welcome to lecture 20. This is the last lecture of this particular module. In previous lecture, we discussed about factors affecting transfer of training. Now in this lecture, we are going to discuss about theories of transfer of training. Why? Because as we already understand, the transfer of training is very critical as when a company spends their resources in training program, they expect that whatever been trained for the employees, that employee has to go back and use it in their workplace. To ensure that yes, the effective transfer of training is taking place, we already learned about what are the factors. Now we need to understand and learn theories behind the transfer of training, so that this will help an organization, a member in an organization, or who is responsible people who are going to be engaged in planning the training program or designing the training program, will have a better understanding about, okay, what ways I should create or develop a training program, design a training program such a way that it will have a more impact on the transfer through a transfer of training in the workplaces. Meaning that we are interested in ensuring through a training program, I want my employees learn something new, improve something what they already have, and come back and use it effectively. So we are going to learn theories which going to give insight to see how do you take those insight and develop a better training program. Okay, so when we talk about a training program, transfer of training, the transfer of training is more likely to occur when trainees work on a task during the training period which are very similar or if not very identical to the work environment. For example, let's say this is the training environment which called, I say, TE. Okay, so let's say this is, I'm just giving pictorial depiction. Now, so which is very similar to, this is my work environment, WE, okay, which I refer to work environment. So my work environment is also very diagrammatically I am representing. Okay, so which are more identical or very similar in nature. When such situations are there, when trainees, this is a training environment, this is a work environment, if they are very similar in nature, if you look at these are very similar, I am diagrammatically showing, when they are very similar, you are going to see that a high level of transfer of training is going to happen. But the transfer of training is more difficult. The transfer of training will be lower, even lower, or maybe very difficult to achieve if the task during the training are different from the work environment. So we call it as a far transfer. So the likelihood of transfer of training to occur is very less compared to a training program which have a very similar or a very close replication of the work environment. Not necessarily the physical situations, we are talking about scenarios, the scenarios they face, or the situations they encounter, or the problems they face, or probably some incidences in a workplace which are very similar. What do they experience in a workplace is and also replicated in the training program. Then you will see that my employees who are trained in such situations will show higher level of learning and transfer in their workplace, vice versa that situations which are not identical at all. The employees are never faced a situation which in their workplace, but that has been discussed in the training program. So what will happen? The connection or the reflection to connect what they are teaching in a training program, vice versa what they are experiencing in the workplace. So it will have a lot of implications. Now that is why it is very important that we are going to learn three important theories which is going to talk about transfer of training, which will definitely have implication on how do I design my training program so that the transfer of training takes place, which is one of the core agenda of any training program. I want the transfer of training to occur. So these theories will provide an insight to design your training so that you are ensuring the transfer of training will take place in the workplace. Okay, now what are those theories? The first theory is theory of identical elements, and second theory is the stimulus generalization, and third one is our cognitive theory of transfer. So we are going to discuss all this theory in detail, and we will also see how this theory will be connected towards training design. Okay, so when you talk about theory of identical elements, so this the below table which provides that primary emphasis and condition which is most appropriate to consider and type of transfer of training in the situations. Okay, let's say this theory is an identical element theory. What does it actually says? What is the emphasis of this particular theory? Which says the training environment, which we refer to TE. So training environment should be identical to the work environment, meaning that very similar or maybe a replica of your work environment. So that is what this theory says. If you are able to create an identical elements, can be a situation, can be an instances, can be a compliance, can be some problems, all that if you can bring it part of the training program, and it will have a very near transfer of training, which will mean the more likelihood that employees will translate their learning in their workplace. So what are the appropriate conditions? Training focus on a closed skills. So what are we referring to the closed skills? Let's say the training which are identical to the work environment. Let's say we are talking about a problems or issues they face during the their workplaces. Okay, when they perform a particular work role, these are the most occurring challenges. So the condition, it says you have to have a very close skill, promoting or developing a skill which will address these are the challenge or a problem. Okay, the problem in a workplace, ABCD. So now you should have a very close skill which will improve or address these problems or a challenge in the workplace. And work environment features are predictable and stable. So that my employees will be able to connect that yes, the training environment and my work environment is very similar. What are they discussing is that I also encounter in my workplace. When I say I encounter this problem, and they will pay attention and they try to learn, okay, how I can improve my situations so that my performance improved, and I will have a better rating from my supervisors. My organization is also will get benefited if I have a better performances. I do not repeat the problem, or I do not fail during those challenging times. So the transfer of training is near. Why do we call near? Because it's are very identical. They will be able to go back and use it immediately, because it has whatever been trained is very identical, very similar to the work environment. Okay, now we are talking about the second theory, which is a stimulus generalization. What does this theory says? This theory emphasizes on general principles are applicable to many different work situations. It is not very similar to what we discussed about identical elements, where they are talking about a very general skill set which may be useful in many different work situations. It not essentially to whatever each of the employees or participants going to go through. You are focusing on more generalized skill sets. For example, this will focus on training focus on open skills, let's say conflict management skill or interpersonal skill, or maybe it will be focusing on leadership skills, or it may be focusing on negotiations, which are very open skills. They may not be negotiating every day. They may not be handling conflict every day. Maybe some organization, yes, possible, but not always. And leadership, it is not always applicable to everybody. It's our open skills or interpersonal skills we are talking about. These are all very open skills. In here, the one work environment is unpredictable and highly variable. In these situations, let's say the training program focused on this. What type of a transfer of training? It is a very far transfer of training. Why do we refer to this as a far? Because this training which are focuses on a skill which is may not be related immediately, because they might use it in a different situations, or maybe even when they moved in a different role altogether they may use it, or maybe as and when they experience such situations only they will be able to use it. That's why this transfer of training, according to this theory, it is a far transfer of training, because let's say I am talking about a negotiation, which is a skill. Okay, now I'm providing a training program for a bunch of my employees on a negotiation skill. How do you negotiate effectively with the clients or customers, or during the business deal at all. So then after this negotiation training is over, and they go back to the workplace. Are you going to see that no, they're going to effectively use all this negotiation skill immediately when they go back to the workplace? Not necessarily. It cannot happen. It will happen only when the participant who participated in the negotiation skill training program, if they go for a negotiation situations, if there is a situation occurs, negotiation situations wherein let's say they are participating in a negotiation with a customer or a client, or they are trying to engage in a business deal, that time they will be able to use effectively whatever they learned, meaning that the transfer training is not immediately when they go back they cannot use that in their workplace, rather as and when the situation arises then they will be able to use it. Okay, now comes the last theory, which is a cognitive theory. So what is the emphasis of this particular theory? This emphasis on meaningful material coding schemes enhances the individual's storage and recall of a training content. It's mostly focused on cognitive ability of the individual, how effectively the employees can store the information and they can recall the information as and when it is required. It is also focusing on the comprehensive ability and understanding the concept being taught in the training program, and you store that information, and when they require they will be use it. It can it's all type of training and environment. So this can be both near and far transfer can possible, because the information which are discussed in a training may be used immediately in the workplaces, or maybe as and when there is a requirement, then they might be able to recollect and retain their learning and use it in the workplace. So we will look into in a detail and a perspective of all these theory. The first theory which we are referring to is yes, theory of identical elements. With this theory proposes that yes, a transfer of training is going to be higher when what is being learnt in a training session is identical to what trainees have to perform on the job. This is the key. When this T and WE are more or less similar and there is a high transfer of training, the transfer will be maximized to the degree the task, materials or equipment and other characteristics of the learning environment are very similar to those encountered in the work environment. For example, when you are conducting a training program, you are using a similar machineries or a similar tool or a similar technology or a software, any tool, technology or whatever we use is very similar to work environment, then it is going to be even more higher transfer, because they will feel that this is what I am doing in my workplace, I am using it. Okay, so for example, induction training program, where induction training program effectively they are training a new bunch of employees who is trained on it, and then they go back and perform the same role, same job. So that's why the transfer of training will be very higher in induction training program, because so we are the replication of the work situations, the tool or technology or a software or a platform, whatever they are using, they are going to use in the workplace they will be trained on that. So the transfer of training will be very higher. Okay, so what are the application of this theory of identical elements? The theory is applied in many training programs, particularly when we use equipment. I want to train somebody on how to use the machinery or how to use the tool, how to use a particular software or a technology. So then in that situations this has more relevance because the transfer occurs immediately. The ability to learn the capabilities exactly to the work situation is more higher, so where this theory is applied. So when you want to design a training program, apply this theory when you feel like my employees should be trained on machineries, machines or tool or technology, okay, or let's say software. All that, when we want to focus, use this theory of identical elements, and you expose the employees to a very similar situations, then the transfer of training will be much higher, and will have a better output of the training program. So application, if you look at see, they are able to learn what they are wanted to do it in the workplace, and they are also practice of a very similar task which they will experience in the workplace. They will also see what are the solutions to the problem which I see. Am I going to learn the problem solving? Am I going to have a rote memory where I will be able to store the information, use it in the workplace? So this theory of identical elements, which is talking about yes, I'm going to learn a very similar task, and also I learn what are the problems and challenges can occur in the workplace, and I'm trying to understand the solution for the problem so that I can go back to my workplace and use the same thing which I learned in a training program. Okay, now comes the second theory, which is a stimulus generalization approach. This theory which is talking about a far transfer, as I already said, why we say far transfer, because the transfer is not going to be immediate. This will occur only when those trained skills or some tool or knowledge which may be useful in a later situations. So the transfer refers to trainees' ability to apply learned capabilities to the work environment, even though work environment may not be identical to that of a training program. Let's say you're training them on some skill set which may not be very similar. The training situations or a training environment may not be very similar or not even identical to the workplace, but it refers to whether my trainees are able to use it even in an unidentical situations when they use it. So this approach can be seen in design of some skill training program, because we are talking about skill training programs which are based on social learning theory. When we are talking about a social learning theory which talks about 4 processes: attention, retention, motor reproduction, and the behavioral reinforcement. So this type of a training program will have more applications when you use this theory which talks about learning them in a non-identical situations, as we talk about a skill-based training programs you provide. And what are the application of this particular approaches? So the theory emphasizes on behaviors, more on certain behaviors which you're talking about, maybe in interpersonal. So this can be used in wide variety of situations. The model demonstrates these are the behaviors through the video, or a trainee have an opportunity to practice them. And maybe it also focuses on interpersonal skill training program, so that they identify, okay, so how I will very effectively communicate with my peers or my customers, clients. I will have a better communication skill. I can handle the team management, and also conflict management, power tactics, using the power tactics in the workplaces, or impression management. These are all the interpersonal skills through this kind of a theory can be applied, wherein the employee is able to learn by observing the similar behavior pattern, which will have a higher probability of having a better workplace performances. Okay. Then comes the last theory, which is about cognitive theory of transfer. This theory is based on information processing theory of learning, where storage and retrieval of information are a key aspects. So this theory essentially focuses on 2 important things. So it is about the storage of the information and retrieval of the information. So this likelihood of transfer of training heavily depends on trainee's ability to retrieve the learned capabilities. Whether my trainee have a better cognitive ability to retrieve whatever they learned, are they able to store and retain those informations? It suggests that likelihood of transfer is increased by providing trainees with the meaningful materials that can enhance that they will link what they encounter in the work environment to the learned capability. So you will be very successful if a training program can provide materials or manuals which will be more handy for them to learn and connect and link in what situations I can use it in my workplaces. It will increase more likelihood of transfer of training to take place. So when we talk about this cognitive theory of transfer, what is it actually focusing on? This is based on key assumptions. There are 3 key assumptions this theory is talking about. One is about individual's mental model. So how my individually as an employee will have a mental model about the workplace situations. May they assume, okay, how I approach these situations if it occurs in my workplace. And individuals' comprehensions, are they able to understand, comprehend in a better way? And individuals' retention of informations. Then comes, okay, I understand, comprehend, then it's also about individuals' retention of information. Am I able to recollect or use the stored information, or retain the information which are stored in memory? These are the 3 assumptions this cognitive theory of transfer which talks about. So it focuses on individual's mental model, how each individual will relate to these situations or work situations or work environment, and how good they are able to understand, comprehend the skills being taught during the training program, and how likely that individual is able to retain the informations. Can they retain the informations through whatever they learned during the training program? So the components of this cognitive theory of transfer, which focuses on comprehension, which is to understand why learning a specific subject is important and what is this relevance, how I will be able to understand. For example, I talk about a negotiation, or I talk about a conflict management style. Okay, conflict management style. So now I should understand learning the specific approaches in handling the situations. Then memory deep, where we are talking about understanding of a new knowledge with the previous experience, how I'm going to understand the new knowledge, which the new information which I'm learning with my previous experiences, connecting with my previous experiences, and comes the application of new information and skills. So how I'm going to use which I learned new, which are a skill, maybe an informations, to develop a problem solving skills in the workplaces. So the cognitive theory of transfer, which heavily depends on individual's ability, where it's a cognitive ability. If you connect with the factors affecting the transfer of training, the trainee characteristics which are talking about cognitive ability, right? The cognitive ability, which depends on individual's ability to comprehend the information, store the information, and retain and relate with those current different work contexts, and then see, can I use this information skills in a to develop problem solving skills in a workplaces. These are some of the components, key components of transfer of training. Now, what are the applications? The influence of the theory is seen in training design that encourages a trainee as a part of program to consider potential applications of training content to their jobs. Now, many training programs which will include work problem or situations identified by the trainees and discuss the potential application of the training content. So they always go with understanding, okay, what are the they discuss with the participants about, okay, what are the different problems you will encounter, can we apply this conflict style in those situations, have you experienced any challenging or conflicts within your team members, between your peers, between your co-workers, can we apply this model in your workplace, how do you apply this model in your workplaces, and also discuss the potential application of the training content to the similar situations they were experienced. For example, negotiation. Let's say we are going for a business deal with a potential client. Now we have discussed on some of the strategies of negotiations. Can we relate this to the situations? How do you use these situations? In this way, the employees will be able to, the trainees will be able to relate those informations, and what do? When they relate, they will also store the information with them. So yes, this is how I should use the negotiation strategy when I encounter a situation A or a situation B in a conflict or negotiation situations. Now when they go back, when there is a situation of a negotiation, the strategy will be stored, and they will be able to retrieve those information and use the strategy effectively during the negotiation situation. These are some of the applications I'm just trying to bring in and reflect upon, so that you will be able to connect that yes, the transfer of training can occur by the application of theory. Okay, so these are the references. Today we learnt about three important theories. One is about theory of identical elements, and we also talked about stimulus generalization approach and cognitive the theory, which we are essentially what we are talking about is how do you design your training program such a way that the transfer of training will take place. Are you going to be focusing on creating identical elements, similar situation in the workplace, so that my employees will able to learn and use it immediately? Am I looking at a far or a near transfer? So this is very important. Why? Because the transfer of training which we are talking about, are we interested in creating a near transfer to occur or a far transfer to occur? So for example, some interpersonal skills or a leadership, all that which we may not immediately see that which will be applicable. Whereas the near transfer is, for example, there is a performance deficiency, which are related to poor operation of a machinery, or making error in usage of tool, Okay, in these situations, what do? I should go for near transfer of training because I want to address this program deficiency. Now in this, which theory I can use? I should apply theory of identical elements. Now I need to create a training program which will have very similar work environment. So meaning that you will come up with a training program which will reflect, which will have similar situations or instances or problems which are encountered by the employees. So if then what will happen, the training program will deliver how do you come up with the solutions for these specific situations or instances or problems. So you can actually apply this identical element theory, wherein you will be able to replicate a similar work environment, and then you will train the employees on how do you solve these problems, how do you address these situations, and what will you do during these instances. For example, I want to train somebody to use the machinery properly. Do not result in any breakdown of the machinery or failure or any error, any deviations should not occur. So what I can do, I can actually make my employees to learn, okay, how should I operate the machinery, what are the most recurring problems are possible, and how, when in case if it happens, how do you fix it. If you can do this in a training program, so when they go back to the workplace, when they operate in the same machine at their workplace, they will know, okay, what are the possible malfunction is possible, and they also know how do I fix if such malfunctioning comes, so that my productivity is not hampered, my productivity is not halted, I continue to have a better performance. That is why the application of theory in what type of a training you design has a lot of implications. For example, the transfer of training is far we are focusing on this stimulus generalization theory, where you conduct a training program where this training program or the building of the capabilities where these employees can use it not in a very identical situation, where in a different situation also. For example, some training has been conducted on a conflict management. In a training place where you talked about a conflict between the employee and the customer. Now, but the conflict strategy can be used in a different version. For example, the employee who had gone through the training may be using this conflict handling strategy when there was a conflict within the team members, or maybe between two teams. When there is a conflict, they can use it effectively also. So when there is a transfer of training may not immediately occur, but when there is a situation arises, then employees who underwent the training can use it. So this is how the theories are very critical in designing what type of a training program I should design, what should be my instruction method. So this theory and transfer of training, or the intention of the transfer training, has a lot of plays in ensuring what type of a training design a company has to come up with. So in this particular module, we learned about the learning theories, application of the learning theories, transfer of training, how do you make an effective transfer of training to occur in the workplace, and also learned about theories which provides the basis for a training design. With this knowledge, we are going to look at the next module, which are focusing on training design, how a program design can happen. So we will look at in the next module on how we will design a training program. Thank you.